Hello all and welcome back to my channel. My name is Pandey and thank you very much for watching my other videos. I am hoping that my videos are adding some values in your day-to-day Intune operation work. In the last two videos, we discussed how to use Logic apps to publish Intune data or reports in a Teams channel or via email. In today's video, we will explore how Logic apps can be used to export Intune data through an export job and save it on SharePoint. As an administrator, we frequently receive requests from various teams for different types of Intune reports for analysis and work purpose. Even Intune admin required these reports for auditing and reporting purpose. Hence, it's very critical for us to automate the generation of common reports and store them on SharePoint so that they can easily access on daily basis. In this video, I will demonstrate how we can achieve this using Logic app, ultimately saving a significant amount of time in report creation and publishing on the SharePoint site. Now let me show you what we will achieve after creating this Logic app. So after implementing this automation, Logic app will automatically generate and save the report on SharePoint on daily basis or as per your requirement. As we can see that I have multiple reports published on my SharePoint site with the name of the report and date along with the time when this report was generated. And using this Logic app, we can generate any of these 28 reports. Like we can see that we have these many reports available in Intune, and we can generate these reports using Logic apps, and we can generate any of these reports just by changing the report name variable in the Logic app. For this demo purpose, I am going to generate the report for all devices, but you can configure the Logic app to generate any of these reports as per your requirement. Now let me show you what all things you need before creating this Logic app. So before creating a Logic app, you have to ensure that you have a SharePoint, as well as in the SharePoint you have to create a folder anywhere in the SharePoint site. In my case, I am using a documents, and within documents I have already created a folder called Intune Reports, and within Intune Reports folder I have another folder called temp dump folder. This folder I am using for the temporary purpose so that Logic app can download the zip file in this temp dump folder and then extract the file and save it in this location. Now the second thing, we have to create a Logic app. So I already created a Logic app called Intune Reporting Logic Apps, and I have already enabled the system assign manage identity. As we can see that the system assign manage identity status is on. I have already provided the necessary permissions so that this manage identity can access the Intune report. And if you are not sure how to create a Logic app or how to assign the permission on the manage identity, you can refer my previous video where I demonstrated everything in detail, and I will provide the link in the description section. Before we begin, if you are enjoying the content, please subscribe for more. Now once we have all these prerequisites in place, we can start creating the Logic app. And to do this, we have to go to the Logic app designer, and then we have to start creating the Logic app. So the very first step in creating the Logic app is to create a trigger. So I am going to use the recurrence, and here we have to specify the interval and the frequency. So I am going to select frequency per day and interval is 1. So I'm going to get 1 report per day, but based on your requirement you can change the frequency and the interval. Now we have to create a variable and provide the name of the report which you want to generate. So I'm going to create a variable. For that I am going to search for initialize variable, and then we have to select the initialize variable which is under action. And now here we have to provide the variable name. So I'm going to provide the variable name as report name, and it's an string, and the variable value is the name of the report. So I'm going to provide devices, but you can change this report name as per your requirement. And I'm also going to rename this action. So I'm going to provide report name which is an initialized variable. Now the next two step is to connect with the SharePoint and delete if any zip file is present in the temp dump folder. So to do this, we have to click on next step, and then we have to search for action related to SharePoint. So I'm going to search for SharePoint, and then we have to sign in to create a connection to SharePoint. So right now I am using my account, but recommendation is to use a service account. So I'm going to click on sign in, and then we have to provide the account. And within SharePoint, we have to search for action called get file property only. And here we have get file property only. Then we have to connect to the SharePoint. So I am going to connect with my SharePoint. And then here we have to provide the library name. So I am going to provide the documents, and under the add new parameter, we have to select the filter query, and here we have to provide the OData. So I'm going to paste file leaf reference is equal to, under here we have to provide the report name, and then we have to provide the extension which is .zip, and then we have to click on save. Now next step is to delete a zip file. So to do this, we have to again add an SharePoint action, and that action is actually a delete. So I'm going to search for delete file, and then we have to provide the name of the site. So this is my site name, and within the file identifier we have to provide the identifier. So we have to select the dynamic content, and under get file property only we have to scroll down, and then we have to select for identifier, and then we can rename this section as delete file for each, and then save it. Now we have to create another variable, and to do this we have to click on new step, and then we have to find the initialize variable which is under variables, initialize variable, and we have to provide the name of the variable report status, and the type should be string, and the value is equal to completed. And we can modify the name of this action called report status initializing variable. Now the next step is to run an export job action so that we can get the URL for downloading the zip file. So to do this, we have to create a post HTTP action. So I am going to click on new step, and then here we have to search for HTTP, and under action we have to select the HTTP, and then here the method is post, and here we have to provide the URL. So this is the URL, and then we have to provide the body. So under body I'm going to provide the report name, and I am going to use the parameter report name, and then we have to add the authentication. So to do this we have to add a new parameter, and then we have to select the authentication, and now we have to select the authentication type. So I am going to select the manage identity, and it's a system assigned manage identity, and we have to provide the audience. So I'm going to copy this URL graph.microsoft.com and paste in the audience, and I'm going to change the name of the step. So I have renamed this step as export job post HTTP step, and then we have to save it. And now we have to create another action called pass JSON action. And to do this, first we have to run this. So I'm going to trigger it, and we have to expand this previous export job post HTTP action, and then we have to copy this body and save this in the notepad file. Now again we have to click on the designer. Now we have to add a new step, and then we have to search for parse JSON. This action is available under the data operation, and we have to select the parse JSON. And in the content we have to provide the body of the previous step. So my previous step is export job post HTTP. So we have to select the export job post HTTP, and then we have to use this body. And here in the schema we have to use the sample payload to generate the schema, and then we have to paste whatever we copied from the previous step. Now we have to click on done, and now it's automatically generated the schema. And then we have to change the name of this step. I have provided the name called export job part JSON action, and then we have to click on save. Now we have to trigger this and see whether we are getting the application ID. And if we go down in the last step under the export job pass JSON action, we can see that we are getting an ID. This is the application ID. So we have to store this application ID in a variable. So to do this, we have to create another variable called application ID. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to click on designer and then click on new step. And then here we have to search for variables, and we have to initialize a variable. So here we have to provide the name of the variable. So I'm going to provide the name called application ID, and the type is string. And under the value we have to provide the ID which we are getting from the previous step export job pass JSON action. So we have to search for ID from export job parse JSON action. So we have to go down, and then we have to select the ID. Now we have to rename this action. So I am going to rename it application ID, which is an initialized variable, and then click on save. Now I am going to run this flow to see whether the application ID is storing the ID information or not. So to do this, again I am going to click on run, and now we can see that all action completed successfully. If we click on the application ID, we can see that the application ID variable is storing a value. Now using this value, we can run a HTTP get command to download the report URL. So now I am creating a new step to run a get HTTP action. So to do this, again we have to select the HTTP, and then under action HTTP, here we have to provide the method get, and then URL is, and then we have to create a bracket, and within bracket we have to use single inverted comma, and here we have to provide the application ID. So we already created a variable called application ID. I'm going to use this, and then we have to provide the authentication method. So I am going to use the manage identity, and then we have to select for manage identity, and in the audience we have to provide the graph.microsoft.com URL, and then we have to change the name of this task. So I'm going to rename it. Now I have renamed it with export job HTTP get action task, and then we have to save it. Now whenever we are running a HTTP action, we have to run a parse JSON action. So to do this, again I am going to trigger it so that I can get the body. So we have to go to the last action, and again we have to copy the entire body and save it in the notepad file. Then we have to add a new action called pass JSON. So I am going to add new action, select data operation, and then parse JSON. Then we have to provide the content, which is the body from the previous step. So my previous step name is export job http get action. We have to search for export job http get action and then select the body. And under the schema, we have to use the sample payload to generate the schema. And then we have to paste whatever we copied from the previous step and then click on done. I am going to change the name of this task also. So I have changed the name export job pass JSON and click on save. Now we have to trigger this flow. So I'm going to run it. Now if in the last step export job pass JSON, if we expand this, we can see that we are getting a content, and in the content we can see that the status is showing as in progress. Now we have to run a loop to ensure that the status is showing as completed. So for that I am going to use an action called until. So now I am going to create a new action called until. For that I am going to click on new step, and then we have to search for action called until. So until is an action which is present under control, and then we have to go down and we can see the until action, and under the choose a value we have to select the status which is present under the export job par JSON action, and then status is equal to completed. And under the change limit I am going to change the count to 10, but based on your requirement you can change up to 20, 30. And then we have to add a new action under the until called delay, because we have to wait for some time to see whether the status is showing as completed or not. So I'm going to add a new action called delay, which is under the schedule, and we have to click on delay. And in the count we have to provide the count. So I'm going to provide 5 count, and under unit I am going to provide seconds, and we have to run another http action. So I'm going to click on add an action, and then we have to select the http under actions, and the method is get, and then we have to provide the URL, and within that we have to provide the application ID, and then we have to select the authentication method. So I'm going to click on add a new parameter and then select authentication, and then under authentication again the manage identity, system assigned manage identity, and in the audience we have to provide the graph.microsoft.com. I'm going to copy it and then paste it, and then we have to save this, and then we have to run this trigger to get the body to create a parse JSON action. So I'm going to run this, and now it's running, and now we can see that until action is started. Now we can see that until action is completed in 59 seconds. If we go to the http action, we have to go down, and then we have to copy the body and then save it. Now we have to add one more action, pass JSON. So I am going to click on designer. Within the until action we have to add an action called pass JSON. So I am going to search for pass JSON, and then in the content we have to provide the body of the previous step, which is http. So we have to search for http and then click on body, and under the schema we have to select the user payload to generate a schema, and then we have to paste whatever we copied from the previous step and then click on done. And now I am going to change the name of this step to checking report status is completed, which is until action, and then click on save. Now if we are running this flow we will get an URL to download the report. So I'm going to check this. So I'm going to run a trigger and then click on run, and now we can see that until action is waiting to change the status from in progress to completed. And now if we are checking the status, we can see that under the body the status is now showing as completed. and under the URL we are getting a link to download the report. Now next step is to add another variable to store the URL path. So I'm going to add a new step, and then here we have to provide the variable called initialize variable, and then here I'm going to provide the variable name called URL path, which is a string, and under the value we have to provide the URL which we are getting under the parse JSON. So I am going to search for parse JSON and then click on URL, and I am going to rename this step as report download URL and then click on save. Now let's check whether we are getting a report download URL under this variable. So to do this, I am again going to run a trigger. Now we can see that the URL path variable is storing the URL location to download the report. Now next step is to run a get command to download the report. So to do this, again I am going to click on designer, and now we have to run a get HTTP action. So I'm going to click on new step and then click on HTTP and then click on HTTP, and here we have to provide the method called get, and under the URL we have to provide the variable, and then I'm going to rename this step as get report HTTP get action and then click on save. Now I am going to trigger this flow again to see whether we are getting a report or not. So I am going to trigger it, and now when we are checking the get report, we can see that in the body we have the content which is nothing but our report. Now next step is to export the zip file on SharePoint. So to do this, I am going to add a new step, and this is related to SharePoint. So I'm going to select the SharePoint, and I'm going to select an action called create file, and then we have to provide the site address, and in the folder path we have to provide the folder location where we want to save the zip file. So I'm going to save under share documents, Intune reports, and then temp dump folder. Then we have to provide the file name. We already created a variable called report name, which is the name of the file with .zip extension, and under the file content we have to provide the body of the get report. So I'm going to provide the body of the get report, click on see more, and then click on body, and I am also going to change the task name as export zip file on SharePoint and then click on save. Now we have to test this whether we are getting the zip file in the temp dump folder or not. So to do this, I am going to run this flow, and now the flow completed successfully. If you check the temp dump folder and refresh it, and now we can see that we have a devices.zip file. Now the next step is to extract this device.zip file and save it under the Intune report. So to do this, I am going to add another step, and then again the action is related to SharePoint. So I am going to use the SharePoint, and this time I am going to use the action called extract folder. In that we have to provide the site address, and then we have to provide the source file path. In my case, the source file path is same as the previous step. So I am going to copy this and make sure that you put slash after that, and then the file name is the report name dot zip. Then we have to provide the destination folder. So this is my destination folder, and then override flag is equal to yes, and then I am going to rename this task name as unzip and extract report, and then click on save. Now if you are running this flow, we should have a CSV report under this folder. So I am going to trigger it. Now all the steps executed successfully, and if we check the SharePoint, we can see that we have a CSV report. Now next action is to rename this file with date and time. So to do this, I am going to use this ID number. We can see that the CSV ID is 161, whereas the GIF folder ID is 160. So I am going to store this GIF folder ID, and then I am going to add 1 so that we will get 161, and then we can use this ID to rename this file. So to do this, I am going to create another variable and store that ID. For that, I am going to use a variable, and we have to select the initialize variable, and here we have to provide the name of the variable, and then type is integer, and in the value we have to create an add function to add the item ID available under the export GIF file on SharePoint plus 1, and then I am going to rename this step as zip file report ID, and then click on save. Now next step is to post HTTP request to SharePoint. So I'm going to add a new step, and then we have to use the SharePoint, and within that we have an option called send an HTTP request to SharePoint, and then we have to provide the site address, and the method type is now post, and under the URL we have to provide the URL, and within the items we have to provide the report ID. So we have to go to the variables and click on see more, and then we have to use the report ID variable, and then we have to provide a parameter. So I'm going to use a header and body parameter. In the headers we have to provide the content type, and the value is application/json, OData is equal to verbose, and the second key we have to provide the XHTTP method, and the value is patch, and then third key we have to provide the if match, and then here we have to provide the asterisk, and in the body we have to provide the body. You have to find your SP data, and in the file leaf I am using a concatenate function to concatenate the report name underscore and then the date and time, and then we have to save this step. Now I am going to trigger this logic app to see the result, but before that let me show you in my Intune reports I have a CSV file, and in the Intune dev I have a zip file. Now I am going to trigger this flow. Now this flow is checking whether the device report status is completed or not. It's going to take 1 minute as per our configuration. And now we can see that all the steps are completed successfully and showing as green. Now if we check the SharePoint within the temp folder, if we refresh it, we can see that we have a device.zip file, and in the Intune reports we can see that we have a report in a better naming convention. So that's all for this video, and let me know in the comment section if you have any question on this. I hope this is an informative video for you. Thank you very much for watching this video.